While my heart goes out to the people in Ukraine, we are not actually here to discuss the news because you can find that everywhere. What I want to talk about here is what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at, what I'm personally doing, and what I think most investors should consider in their own personal investing strategies and what they can expect from the markets themselves. So let's get right into it because there is some really interesting data today and it's going to be a value-packed episode. War affects markets in very, very interesting ways, and some of those are actually surprising. Like, for example, in some conflicts, there is actually less volatility than in peacetime. But what markets don't like the most is the uncertainty. We saw that with the conflict in Ukraine. There was a serious drawdown at the day of the invasion, and after that, the market has been rallying. Why is that? Well, markets don't like uncertainty at all. So they'd rather know, is there going to be a war or not? If there's not going to be a war, investors will do certain things, for example, invest in more risky assets. If there is going to be a war, investors will orient themselves towards commodities or gold or whatever they deem necessary. But these two scenarios are certain. They know what to do in one scenario and they know what to do in the other scenario. But the uncertainty of whether we should go that way or that way is what gets to investors' nerves. But let's look at some data. What I'm going to show you now is the S&P 500's performance during several particularly shocking geopolitical events. Okay, so what we're looking at here is many geopolitical events during the last 70 years, basically, starting from the attack of Pearl Harbor. And what we can see in this chart is the date of the event, the worst performance that the market had during that event, and the total drawdown during the whole crisis. Then on the right, we can see how long it took the market to bottom out and how long it took it to actually recover to previous all-time highs. Obviously, the worst one here on the list is the Pearl Harbor attack in World War II. That led to a 3.8% drop in one day for the S&P 500 and an overall drop of 19.8%. It took the market 143 days to bottom out and 307 days to recover. All of the other events here, although very significant, were not as bad, including attacks such as September 11th, including the Cuban Missile Crisis, and many other terrorist attacks such as the Boston bombing, Madrid bombing, or London subway bombing. Obviously, the market reacted negatively to all of these events, but the total drawdown was not only not that bad, but it recovered fairly quickly. We can see at the bottom that the average one-day drop was 1.2% for all of these events. The total drawdown was 5%. It took 22 days to reach the bottom and 47 days to recover. What we're looking at next is the market's performance during the whole period of a major war in the world. The examples here that are given are World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Gulf War. And at the top we can see an average for all wars compared to the whole period of 1926 to 2013. We can see here the performance of large cap stocks, small cap stocks, long-term bonds, 5-year notes, long-term credit, cash, and inflation. And it is fairly obvious here that bonds and credit, as well as cash, in most cases fail to beat inflation. So you're better off in small cap or large cap stocks, even though on average you are taking a lot more risk investing in small caps. And if you are to pick individual stocks, you need to remember that several sectors do much better or much worse depending on what kind of a war it is or where it is, which we will take a look at later. So that's why you are better off either picking large caps or just investing in the S&P 500, as that is the most diversified investment that you could make. And as we'll find out later, diversification is probably one of the most important things during times of war. And just something to consider, the worst war in history, World War II, still returned for large cap stocks 16.9% per year. That is hard to believe, but that's what the data says. Now, obviously, in the current macroeconomic times, inflation is even worse than what we've had during these periods here. We are currently averaging about 7.5%, officially, unofficially, probably more, which means that you need to be especially careful in picking your investments, and that cash is an even worse option than historically it has been. So that is the historical data for the markets throughout all of these conflicts, and as you can see, is not nearly as bad as one would expect. But let's look at the performance of the market and some sectors during our current crisis. Like I said, sectors perform differently in different conflicts. In this case, price of crude oil has gone through $100 per barrel, which is crazy to think about because 2 years ago we actually had negative prices, therefore prices below zero because of the COVID crisis. And now we are over $100 per barrel, and this is likely to get worse. And now, because of the sanctions in Russia, Europe has decided to accelerate its renewables program in order to reduce its dependency on Russian gas and oil. Which means that stocks and ETFs which are related to the renewable sector have spiked quite considerably. And due to the fact that Germany and the EU in general have announced that they would be increasing defense spending by quite significant margins, ETFs and stocks which are related to aerospace and defense have also jumped quite significantly. And as we can see here, the iShares US Aerospace and Defense ETF is up over 12% in the last month, with quite a significant spike following the invasion itself. Now, if you've had positions in ETFs or companies exposed to those sectors, congratulations, because you've probably made a decent gain. If you've had exposure to Russian companies, on the other hand, such as Lukoil or Gazprom, well, I feel really sorry for you right now, but that is the risk of picking individual stocks. That is why we are yet again talking about diversification. Diversification in multiple markets, diversification in multiple companies and sectors. And that is why the humble ETF or index fund with low cost is your best friend yet again. So what am I personally doing during this period of conflict? Absolutely nothing. I'm not changing anything in my strategy. In fact, I have ramped up buying and I have bought S&P 500 in what seems to be the bottom so far. However, things are likely to go down even more because we do not know yet what impact the sanctions on Russia will have on Europe and the West itself, because obviously in the modern globalized world, everything is very interconnected and it's likely to have some blowback, but we cannot estimate the impact of that as of yet. However, there is perhaps some good news because the Federal Reserve is likely to consider the current events and the invasion of Ukraine in its decision to hike interest rates, which means that interest rates wouldn't be hiked as much as previously anticipated. So that's my strategy. I believe nobody can predict anything, and I will just continue doing what I have done before, and that is to just dollar cost average and keep buying. In fact, I have been buying even more, especially crypto, during this period because we've had some amazing opportunities that I've managed to take advantage of, because that is part of my strategy this year. As I said in previous videos, I am planning to expand my crypto holdings, and that's what I have been doing mostly because I believe the prices are quite good at the moment. Is there a chance that they will continue down? Yes, there is. Will I continue to buy? Yes, I will. Now, I guess a lot of you are thinking, but Lex, what about if this war actually gets worse? What about nukes? I mean, none of the conflicts that we've looked at have involved nuclear warfare, the only exception being the Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II. But none of them have involved all-out nuclear warfare. The reality is that nuclear war is highly unlikely, but even if it does happen, well, I'm sorry to say, but none of your investments actually matter, because we won't have a financial system, we won't have an economy, we won't have anything. The only things that will matter during such an insane scenario would be shelter, food, perhaps weapons. That's it. Maybe physical gold that you can use to barter, but physical gold that you have as a bar stored in a safe, or coins, or anything that is physical. Your cryptocurrency is likely to be absolutely worthless, because chances are we won't have any internet, or at least not everywhere. And unfortunately, without the internet, crypto is pretty much useless. If you happen to be impacted by the conflict, for example, if you are in Ukraine, then I hope you've had an emergency fund in foreign reserve currency such as the dollar, the euro, or possibly physical gold, because those are pretty much the only things that can get you out of the country or can be of some use to you if the currency in your country happens to collapse. So if you're worried that the conflicts might impact you or might come to your country, for example, if you're living in Poland, if you're living in Romania, if you're living in the Baltic states, if you are concerned about the conflict and you want to invest in the eventuality that it does come to your gates, number one, as always, have an emergency fund. You might need to use it to get out. You might need to use it to buy necessities. And the best option would be to have that emergency fund in foreign reserve currency, as I said, euro, dollar, physical gold, anything that is likely to be much more stable than the local currency, because if you get attacked, then chances are local currencies will be impacted as well. Of course, make sure you have physical shelter, make sure you have some rations of food if you need them, make sure you have weapons if you can get them. I am shocked that I even have to talk about this. I've never thought about having to actually consider that scenario. And it just hit me, it's not a good direction. It's unlikely that it will come to that, but in case you want to be prepared, that's what you need. More than likely, this all will blow over soon. And just to top it off, I would like to give you 7 tips to stay calm during this difficult market period. Number 1, be prepared. Meaning, do what you have to do. If you're close to Ukraine, prepare for any eventuality. If you're not, being prepared just means doing your research and potentially singling out what you're going to buy if the market continues downwards. Number 2, review long-term trends. As we can see, the long-term trend of renewable energy and clean energy has just sped up because of this conflict, and it's good to review which sectors or which trends are here to stay or will accelerate. That way you can position yourself better to take advantage of that opportunity. Number 3, remind yourself that recovery is likely. It is not only likely, but is pretty much historically and statistically guaranteed. You have maths and stats on your side. Number 4, think of it as bargain shopping. Everything is on discount and you're buying on the cheap. Number 5, if you live in the US or any country that allows tax loss harvesting, meaning that you can offset some of your taxes by harvesting losses, then you can take advantage of that during this time. Remember that you have a plan, you have a strategy, review that plan and make sure you're sticking to it and you are on track. And last but not least, avoid decisions made in fear, because those often lead to regret. That's it, guys. I'd love to hear what you're thinking, what you're doing, and what your plan is during this critical period. And if you've enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate a like and a comment. Thank you very much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.